This is Jasmeet Nair, Ehsaas woman of Amritsar. Good evening and welcome to another session of Right Circle Amritsar, an initiative of Prabha Khetan Foundation. Prabha Khetan Foundation is an NGO based out of Kolkata and strives to address the causes of women through curated events for like-minded people and literary enthusiasts in over 35 cities and overseas. Now that the pandemic has put the world to a halt, the foundation has turned into virtual sessions with patrons, not to be deprived of music, literature, dance, and culture. The Right Circle is one such initiative by the foundation to let the patrons rendezvous with literates from all across the globe, and the patrons can now tune on to the sessions from the sanctity of their homes. We are going to take forward this session of talk till 6:15, followed by a question and answer session moderated by Sonakshi Kundra, another Ehsaas woman of Amritsar, and a thank you note at 6:30 sharp by Sonakshi herself. The guest for the evening today is Seema Anand. Seema is a London-based mythologist and a narrative practitioner. She's an acknowledged authority on Kama Sutra and erotology, Tantric philosophy and the Mahavidyas, Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita, among other subjects. Her work on the revival and reproduction of oral literature from India is associated with the UNESCO projects. For the endangered oral traditions, she's a vivacious narrator. We are going to really enjoy listening to her. And now, to carry on the conversation with her is another Ehsaas woman of Amritsar, our very own Preeti Gill. Preeti Gill is an independent literary agent with 20 years of experience in the publishing industry as a commissioning editor and the rights director. She's the founder of Maja House, the first of its kind of literary and cultural hub hosting brilliant writers, speakers, and performers since it opened its doors. Celebrating lit fests, children fests, and countless workshops and discussions at the courtyard of Maja House. She's edited She Stoops to Kill, and is also the editor of the Peripheral Center Voices from India's Northeast, as well as the Women's Conflict on Women in Nagaland and Assam. A documentary is to her credit, Rambui, the Mizoram's Troubled Years, along with Sanjay Hazarika, and she's currently working on the non-fiction writing on Punjab. I have a very nice piece of information for all the enthusiasts who have joined us today. Friends, you'll be getting a copy of the book. For all those who attend the session, and also you have to send in your addresses. So this copy will be sent to you by Prabha Khetan Foundation. Now I request all of you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the session. And I pass the mic over to Preeti Gill.
Thank you very much, Jasmeet. Thank you for that introduction. And lovely to meet you, Seema. I have been looking at some of your videos and some of your interviews, most intriguing, most exciting, actually. And so let's begin our conversation right away. I want to just go back to the title of this book, intriguingly titled The Ancient Arts of Seduction. How did you decide to work in this area? I know that Jasmeet has just introduced you as a mythologist and a storyteller and somebody who's also working to keep alive India's very rich oral traditions of storytelling. But how did you decide to go to something like the Kama Sutra?
So, Preeti, it was actually a very organic journey. I work with mythologies, as you said, and I work with the women's narratives because I believe that stories are very powerful. You know, stories are the most powerful tool of influence. And it's the stories that we tell that establish our identity. So I repeat this story often enough, but you know, we have lots of stories from India where we talk about how the man comes home drunk and he beats up his wife, but she's so good, she never says anything to. And the moment you say that, that's how you define a good woman, somebody who will keep quiet through thick and thin, never stand up for herself. And the woman who stands up for herself and fights back is not the good woman. So I found that, and you know what? I mean, if we ever want to create change, it is these stories that are going to have to be changed before we can get anywhere. It doesn't matter how many laws we make or whatever else we do. So I found that as we kind of work towards these stories of women, I noticed that I never ever found a story where a woman was responsible for her own body, where she had the right over her own sexuality. So I thought, let me find out what are the stories that we have silenced. And that journey led me into the ancient erotic literatures of India. And I'll tell you what, that was, I think about 13 years ago now, 14 years ago now. And I had thought to myself, okay, I'll do a paper on it, 15,000 words and I'll be done. It is such a fascinating subject that I have not been able to move away. I've just gone deeper and deeper because it's unbelievable. It's fabulous.
Yeah, I remember you saying somewhere that there are traditions of erotic or of this kind of sensual writing, of physical intimacy across cultures. I mean, it's not just the Kama Sutra in India. One is the fact that it exists in many other cultures, like I think you talked about Japan and Iran and so on. And also the fact that there are thousands of such writings. So the Kama Sutra, which seems to be the only one that one seems to know about, although the thing that comes to mind first of all is Vatsyayan and the Kama Sutra. But apparently there's a whole tradition of them. This is what you say. Would you like to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes. So the ancient cultures all believed in the importance of pleasure, sex, sexual intimacy, lovemaking, pleasure was extremely important. It was understood that this was a very, very special, at least in the Eastern cultures, that it was a very special part of your life. It's funny because, Vatsyayan, as you said, is writing the Kama Sutra in around 300 something AD. So about, I don't know, 1700, 1800 years ago. He's sitting on the banks of the river Ganges, we are told, and he's writing this book about pleasure. And he's writing about how pleasure is the path to heaven. It's so good for you, etc. At exactly the same time, exactly 325 AD, the Catholic Council sit down for the very first time. And their very first text they start writing is about how pleasure is bad. It's the path to hell. So by 342 AD, they had passed their first law banning oral sex, banning anal sex, because they say sex is only for reproduction, for having babies. And oral sex and anal sex is purely for pleasure. So this is bad, it's banned. And so, we in India have unfortunately got stuck in this twilight zone, between the Kama Sutra says it's fabulous, you should practice it, and the Catholic Church that said it's a very bad thing, you shouldn't. But the Eastern cultures all believed in the idea of pleasure. The difference between the Indian one and the other ones, so there's the Chinese, the Japanese, the Persian, the Indian erotic literature, the ancient one, Preeti, it's so beautiful, it's so delicate, it's so elegant, it's so focused on a woman's pleasure. It's so utterly beautiful, I can't tell you. Whereas the other ones, which are the Chinese, the Japanese, the Persians, they're mostly focused on the act of sex. I'm going to surprise you by telling you that the Kama Sutra actually does not mention the act of sex. It talks about positions, but doesn't talk about the act of sex. And also the other ones are fairly aggressive. There's quite a lot of dominance, there's male dominance, there's a lot of aggression and violence towards women. The Kama Sutra does not believe in that. It actually tells you constantly that no aggression is allowed during sex. I mean, it's just unbelievable the way that it deals with it. And just to let you know how important this subject was in ancient times, like you said, thousands of them were written. Every king who came to the throne would commission a copy of the Kama Sutra or an erotic book.
Okay.
Based on, in those days, only men were taught how to read or write, okay? Women were not taught. So these were written for men, based on how to pleasure a woman properly. That's what the basis of the book was, because they believed that if a couple had really good, mutually pleasurable intimacy, then the relationship would be stable. The relationship was stable, society would be stable. If society was stable, the kingdom would be stable. And so I always say that, we are really discussing this for the sake of national security. I mean, this is what we should be teaching in our, honestly, I mean, this is what we should be teaching in our defense academy.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think, what you're saying right now, that karma or the positions that are described there also are something that seems to be basic to a lot of the, life skills that one has. Or to go back to ancient times, you've also said somewhere that in one of your chapters, I think, where you say that it's also was used as military strategy. I remember hearing that about that clinging vine, that particular position, and how they were to use that in defense.
Now, I must tell you that I think personally that the Kama literature of India was written by a woman. It was written by women. We've got a couple of mythologies from our past that actually suggest that. But because this text is so deeply focused on the pleasure of a woman, and it doesn't say कि इतना time हो गया है, अब जल्दी करो, none of that. I mean, and even when it talks about a woman having a tantrum, a man is told that he is not allowed to say, okay, what the hell, now enough, I've said sorry. He's got to carry it through, keep apologizing till she is ready to forgive him. So I really think it was written by women. And I think that they were trying to change the way that society, they believed that, if you actually thought really differently about intimacy, if you thought of it as something beautiful and good, it would change civilization. It would make for a more civilized society. And for years before the Kama Sutra, it has been believed that, okay, woman's pleasure is based on the pleasure of a man. And so they're trying to change this whole narrative. And I think that they realize that you can't, like I said earlier, you have to change the story. You can't just come and say, ye philosophy hai, ye theek hai. So they tell the men, because as I said, the books are all written for men. They tell the men that if you are able to pleasure your wife fully, your business will do better, because she will look after your house properly, make sure she doesn't spend too much money, blah, blah, blah. If you learn how to pleasure a woman properly, you'll be a better warrior, because variety is the spice of life. And if you can understand how in bed to excite her by doing the same thing, but in a different way every time, you'll understand how to do it on the battlefield by doing the same thing, but taking the enemy by surprise by doing it differently every time. So I absolutely love the reasoning behind it. I'm convinced it was written by a woman, because it just has so much power to it, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, the position that you mentioned is fantastic. So it talks about the standing position, the clinging vine position. And it says that so in a clinging vine position, the man stands resting against something, and the woman wraps herself around him in a particular way. And it says that if you can learn how a woman does that, and if you wrap yourself around your enemy in hand-to-hand combat, you will be able to overpower him. I told you, Defense Academy, new syllabus.
Yeah, that's quite something. Anyway, the other thing that I think is that, this is not something that people talk about. Not even women. They find it difficult. This is a subject that's, even if not taboo, but it's definitely something that is not drawing room conversation. It's certainly very, very tough to approach something like this. So how did you manage to do that? What was the reaction, especially say from your own family or, your children? I see the pictures behind you, the drawings. What about your own family and people around you? when you pick this up?
So I have to say that so sex is not a taboo subject. I find everybody is ready to sit in a party and tell dirty jokes, never a problem. It's when you talk about it beautifully or you talk about pleasure, that's the taboo subject. That's like, what is she talking about? So yeah, it was a difficult step to take. I have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. My kids have been amazingly supportive. The boys are terribly embarrassed of my work still, but they're very proud of it secretly. My daughter-in-law, so my eldest one recently got married, and I did a speech. I was told to do a speech on the Kama Sutra at their wedding, which I did, which I have to say was very popular. So my daughter and my daughter-in-law are hugely supportive. My sons are very quiet about it and would like to, they like the idea that their mother does some amazing work, but they don't want to discuss it. My husband, who is a true Punjabi, found it very hard to come to terms with it, and it took him a long time. But I think I finally got to the point where I just said, well, this is my subject. I will be doing this. I don't need your permission, but I would like your support. And so finally, after a long time, he's put aside a little bit of his Punjabi-ness. The day that I decide to give it up, he'll be very happy because I'll sit at his feet and say, Swami, aapni aap hai. But right now, I'm the woman with a mind, So yeah, he's dealing with that poor man.
This whole idea of silencing, it's something, for me, I find that mostly women's narratives are silenced. I used to work earlier with the Women's Publishing House. And so, of course, we were constantly on the lookout for voices which have either been marginalized or hadn't been heard before. And a lot of women's voices are exactly that. How does this, the work that you're doing, I think, is in a large part breaking that silence or breaking the myths around this kind of silencing as well of certain subjects. Tell us about that as well. What do you find, this whole thing around silence?
I think that it has been silenced. It's a form of power, let's face it. It's like, so in ancient India, they believed that pleasure was the path to heaven. They said that a woman has 8 times the capacity for pleasure than a man does, which meant that she had more power. She had more capacity for power. Okay, because if you can raise that sexual energy, that pleasure energy, and you can harness it, it is the path to moksha. So I guess it was a power thing. And also it was about, saying, okay, if I keep you in this place, then I don't have to worry about you. So very soon, this idea that a woman has 8 times the capacity of pleasure was being used against her, that you have 8 times the capacity of pleasure, you're likely to be a slut. Let's put you away. So it was about control, that it was silenced. I think that for me, the breaking of these stereotypes or taboos comes from 2 points. And one is that I've decided that I don't want to do it as a stand-up comedian, because the moment you make a joke out of something, you diminish it. The other is that I really want to be able to get the language into people's heads, to be able to say that pleasure is not just about sex. That, because that's what we've all been taught, that this is all about sex, it's a man's pleasure, and most women find the actual act of sex terribly boring, frustrating, non-pleasurable. It's a fact. And very few women are able to actually come to orgasm during sex. So the idea that the Kama Sutra says that you shouldn't even think about the penetrative part of it. It says to the men, you must bring a woman to orgasm at least twice before you actually penetrate, before you decide to have sex. There is so much more to it, So it's just about opening up these doors which say, pleasure is what it's at, and pleasure is not about sex. So open up those little channels in your mind, just go into it in your own mind. Don't do anything else about it. And the other thing is the language. I find that how bad is the language we use around sex. I mean, every part of the anatomy is a cuss word. Okay, it's an abuse, it's a gali. The Kama Sutra talked about the woman's body with such beautiful terminology. I mean, where the yoni, the vagina was the Chandan Mahal. How beautiful, how you really cannot make that into a gali. Teri maa ki Chandan Mahal, you cannot make, it's just like, sorry, but I think I want to be able to change the language of it, just to tell people that it is okay to talk about it, and it's possible to talk about it in an elegant, nice way.
And also
you're talking about doing women's narratives and so on. Naomi Wolf, I was going to say Naomi Campbell. Naomi Wolf, the very famous feminist activist, she always says, imagine if we were to bring up young girls today in a society where they hear of their body being described in such beautiful terms, how differently they would feel about themselves. Look at the difference in self-esteem.
Yep, exactly. And also, like, at least as far as India is concerned, or maybe even South Asia, where the woman, I mean, for us, it's, you have the stereotype of the woman as the mother, as the wife, as the sister. It very rarely goes into lover. But then, so you're the Devi, and that's how you could be, you can be put on a pedestal and revered because of your qualities of nurture and care and giving and all of that, and even food or even labor, both kinds of labor. But you're forbidden all the same. You're still forbidden from actually acknowledging that your body might also require something more, and that something more might be pleasure, might be the acknowledgement of desire. So how difficult do you find this kind of disjunct between the image and what you're trying to convey, that there is a wholeness of a woman?
You know how it is in India. I mean, the time that I was growing up, I'm now 58. I lived in Amritsar for a few of those years in my childhood. If you were somebody who believed in pleasure, you were a fast woman. You were bad. Yeah. It hasn't changed hugely. I have to tell you that about 6 years ago, 5 years ago. So I'm 58 now. 5 years ago, when I was 53 or 54, there was a little rumor put around about me that I was a corporate call girl. And I burst out laughing initially because I thought, well, if the corporates need a 54-year-old as their call girl, they're doing very badly. Okay. But the point is that, it's still not okay. I have lost friends over my work. I have to say, though, that my work is now becoming better known and those people are wanting to come back into my life. But no, it's been a real journey. It's a battle. Every time I get up on that stage, it's a battle to actually convince people to think even just itna sa difference, just that much.
So it's like, do you have to put on another, like a persona, like that old Beatles song, wear the face and then be on stage, or are you the same person?
I think by now I've kind of marinated in my subject. So I am that person now. I've become totally into it. Also because I've always been a hugely, very firm activist when it comes to women's narratives. And I'm lucky. I come from a family where the women have always, so my great-grandmother was highly educated, a working woman. My grandmother was an educated working, so my great-grandmother was also, aside from being an inspector of schools back in that time, she was also a social activist. And she fought for women's rights, and she actually died leading a protest. My grandmother was one of 4 sisters who were all, when I say highly educated, the 2 of them were medics and 2 were principals of colleges. So they believed in, so I come from a family where women have not just have the right to stand up, but they have to stand up and do something and achieve something. So my issue comes only when I go out into the actual world and I realize that women don't have equal rights. But I think now I've just become me.
Yeah, and also because I'm just coming to present day and what's going on and what we are seeing on TV and what we are reading here in India. One of the things which I think ties in with what you're saying about women's choice and women's freedom and women's being able to express themselves through the body and through the choices that they make is this very controversial, law, the love jihad law, which has already come into UP. A couple of other states are already thinking about it. Where again, love is now again being looked at as something which is illegitimate rather than, something which you should actually be rejoicing about or celebrating. What do you think of this? Because it is in a way, again, curtailing.
Absolutely. It's like every time you go forward, somebody takes a step or 3 steps back. So there's my friend Nivedita Menon, who's the professor of feminism at JNU. And she wrote a book, and she says that, like I was saying earlier, that stories are the most powerful tool of influence. And as time moves on, the stories change, they evolve, and so the likelihood of them changing is there. And so there is an entire machinery that has to work extra hard to keep the story the same. And I also believe that if women are going to stand up for themselves and fight to go forward, or people are going to stand up for themselves and fight to go forward, there is going to be a backlash. I mean, when you go into battle, there is bloodshed, unfortunately. And it's just, this is one thing I just don't understand. I mean, when you were saying about this love jihad, and recently there was that thing about Meera Nair's
film, yeah.
film,
Suitable
and
boy.
the kissing scene outside the temple. We have from our ancient times a treatise called the Shilpa Shastra, which is on architecture and sculpture, how to actually do architecture, how to formulate measurements, etc. And it says that all buildings must have on the outside wall somewhere a sculpture of a couple making love, because that joyousness, that bounteousness, that the union of joy and the productivity from it is symbolic of what they want that building to bring. So that we have to be able to carry that into our lives. So it was actually seen as the symbol of joy, productivity, happiness, ultimately moksha. I don't know where, I mean, it's very easy to say that, okay, we had the, all the different invasions ending with the colonial rule. And it's very easy to say, कि उनकी वजह से है, but okay, now they've also been gone a while, and we do need to start going back to our ancient texts. And the Kama Sutra, Preeti, inspired 2000 years of literature. We have got 2000 years of epic romances that talk about the joys, the beauty of physical intimacy. Everybody from Kalidas to Bhanu Datta to Dandin, all our ancient Sanskrit literature. So we need to start maybe going back to it just to understand it. I don't know what is the answer, except that you can't stop the battle. We have to carry on if that change is going to happen.
Yes, I agree with you there, but I mean, it just seems to be getting tougher and tougher somehow. And a lot of the battles you thought were already fought and won to some level, you seem to be going back to fight them all over again. But also that, how does the work, like the book, for example, and your work that is in all of the stuff that you talked about right now, tie in with the storyteller part of you? Do you use the same text? How does that happen?
So the book itself was supposed to be a commentary on the Kama Sutra. Now, the Kama Sutra is a treatise. And like any other treatise, whether it's the Shilpa Shastra, whether it's the Arth Shastra, it's written in metaphor. So it's not for the average person to be able to understand. It doesn't work. So the people over the centuries wrote treatises on the subject to explain what they were trying to say. So, like I said, it's full of metaphors. So for instance, when we talk about positions in our literature, we never talk about positions. We talk about each position through a piece of jewelry. So for instance, the sitting position is a woman wearing a 9-string necklace of pearls. So ladies, if you're listening out there, get yourself a 9-string necklace of pearls. It'll actually encourage you to execute the position better. That was what it was meant to be. So in our literature, for instance, if you said, and a lot of it where you say, okay, the women came with their jingling girdles. The jingling girdle was when the woman was going to be on top. If you don't know what it means, you don't know what they're talking about. But in actual fact, there were all the narratives on Pan. The giving and taking of Pan was like texting between lovers. So you could send different types of messages to each other. Everything from saying I love you to saying I want to hook up with you to saying I can't stand you, don't call me again, to saying I have a headache, don't come near. It's a hugely developed vocabulary of love because it was considered such an important subject. And for me, it was about saying, okay, I will write this commentary. I will tell you what those things mean, so that if you decide to go back to reading all our ancient literature, like if you read Kalidas's Kumar Sambhavam, which is the story of Shiva and Parvati coming together, where she breaks his meditation and Kartika is born, or Kadambari, or whatever. All of these texts can only be understood if you know what those metaphors mean. So it was my effort at helping to open up the story world of ancient India.
Yeah, but to go back to all these interesting things, the one that you just mentioned about Pan, but there was something else that I remember listening to you saying, these messages that women were actually leaving for other women on bodies, on the body of the man. I mean,
story.
That again seems like, of course, a very subversive kind of, very womanly subversive kind of way of sending this message.
I love that particular story. Yeah, do we have time? I know that.
I think we have another, it's
couple minutes.
Yeah, we have 10 minutes, yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
More than 10 minutes, yeah.
Okay, great. So, we talk about erotica. As you know, 50 Shades of Grey is like the most sold book in the world. Okay, but we're still like sexist taboo, of course. But ancient erotica, like I said, the Kama Sutra is talking constantly about pleasure and all the other texts on karma, and these are translated into stories to give you an idea of the kind of stories. So there's this wonderful story about this courtesan, and this man comes to her regularly to make love, and one day when he comes to her, as they make love, she smells the perfume of another woman on him. And as we know that the perfume was used very, very specifically. So each part of the body had to have a different perfume. And it had to be quite carefully put where you could smell each one differently. So it had to be like each part had to be individual and perfumed and so on. Now you can imagine if she's smelling another woman's perfume on this man, which perfume is she smelling on what part of his body, depending on what the other person has been doing. So she starts to get really fascinated by this other woman. And she decides to leave messages for this other woman on his body. So again, there's a whole vocabulary of love bites and love scratches. Each one had its own message, its own occasion. It's very, very, it's very elegant. So she starts to leave messages. And of course, as we know, there was also this whole idea that as the moon moves in its phases, your erogenous zones move around the body, and that's where you were supposed to be stimulating a person at that point. So she starts to leave messages with love bites and love scratches on the man's body for the other woman. And finally, the other woman picks it up and she starts to respond. And so the two of these women, actually, they never meet, but they have this very intense affair where they explore each other's bodies, but through his body. And he's just merely the carrier. I mean, he's all scratched up and bitten up, but he's just the carrier. And I love the story. I mean, can it get more erotic than that? Can it get more beautiful?
Yeah, and subversive, because I mean, I doubt whether did the guy even know that this was going on or this was happening?
No. He wouldn't have known because, they never communicate. It's like, how wow is that?
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. But like I said, you're also a professional storyteller, and so the kind of stories go back again to the ancient texts, from India. How does that, translate? Because you live in the UK, and how does that translate to foreign audiences? How do you bring them to life? How do you make people understand?
So my initial work was in mythologies, and actually I have to say that the most of the scholarship till now has been in the West, because I think in the West for a longer time they've understood the idea of research much better. So I have been studying, for instance, the female characters of the Ramayana that have been silenced. Mm-hmm. And I'm doing that with a professor at Oxford, and I've been doing that for a few years. So, and there are hundreds and thousands of different Ramayans. And I have to tell you that you talk to Professor Brockington and his wife, Mary Brockington, they can tell you every reference, every line. They can tell you kab likha tha, kisne likha tha, kaun si sadi mein likha tha. It's amazing. I cannot get the same tutorage in India. So it is for studies, definitely it's been easier. My studies in the Mahabharata have been with somebody who's based in America. I'm a follower of the tantric philosophy. Again, my studies of tantra are with people like Ian Baker, who's over here. So, it's about studying. I also find that the art of storytelling as a form of entertainment is far more established now over here. In India, it used to be, we've lost it. Over here, people are a lot more open to it. So I do a lot of storytelling over here and, work around it. The biggest thing in telling, let's say, Indian stories to a foreign audience is about understanding how to put it into the right context. So you have to reference it properly. And that is something, again, that you learn professionally as an art form, how I can tell a story when I come to India. I can use certain words, I don't have to think about it. And how that changes in its referencing when I come over here. So that is a set of studies that I had to do.
And do you need props for it, or how do you?
I try never to use props because I find that it distracts people. I want people to just focus on the picture that the words draw, because these stories are a lot of fun. I mean, I'm working right now on creating a podcast of stories, mostly for the slightly older, when I say slightly older, my age group, of people of our ethnic or different ethnic backgrounds, because over lockdown, everybody's had such mental health issues.
Yeah.
So this is about getting them exercising while listening to a story. And the people who were sponsoring the podcast, they were like, I wanted to do these stories of all our gangsters and their girlfriends. So I got a whole series together of Dawood Ibrahim and, a few of the others.
All the malls and
all the malls and all that, great fun stories. And they were like, nahi, hum ye apne this thing pe nahi lage. Can you do some traditional tales? And I was like, oh my God, I don't want to do the same old traditional tales. So I have been looking for stories written around the same characters. So, around Vishnu, around Garuda, around the Mahabharata and so on, but really fun, different stories from the past. So there are all sorts of things available. It's about, like I said, just understanding how you put them across.
And do you also read to different age groups? Like, do you also read to children, or do you?
So I do some storytelling for children, very, very seldom. I prefer to do most of my storytelling with adults, even if it's not about the Kama Sutra, because I find that our stories have a different background. There's a lot more knowledge in them. And I like to be able to impart that knowledge aspect. So I do, my preferred audiences are the older generation.
And also, I think you said it, you said something like this as well right now, that the story changes. Of course, each time you tell it, you probably bring new nuances into it, or you change it according to your audience. But does it change you also? Does this rereading or retelling change?
Yeah, have you heard Bulle Shah's this thing, Ek Nukhte Vich Rab Milda Hai? He says, Vek Nukhta Chod Hisab Mano. Forget those big formulas. It's all about that one point, Ek Nukhte Vich Rab Milda Hai. I find that as you tell a story, and each time with a different audience, you change one little aspect, it's like a little nerve ending comes alive. It's like a little new thing it's like a little bit of enlightenment. And you learn something new comes into your life at that point. So yeah, I think it changes you.
Lovely. I think that's a lovely thing to say. And, I mean, it's wonderful to see that there's growth on both sides then. The audience and the storyteller both are sort of reacting to each other and the way the story is told. So Nakshi, I'll ask one last question, which is to do with Amritsar. Tell us something that you remember about the days that you were here, the friends you have here, the great memories, food and other things of Amritsar, because everybody remembers that.
Well, Preeti, I have to tell you, so my nanke were in Amritsar. My mother got divorced when she was pregnant with me. So she came back from Delhi, back to her parents' place, and so I was born in Amritsar, and I spent the first 5 years over there. Then I went off to boarding school at the age of 5 to Wellams. Anyway, long story short, came back at the age of, I did like 3 years. My last 8th, 9th, 10th, I did at Sacred Heart in Amritsar. Made a lot of fabulous friends who I'm still in touch with. I adore them. Happiest years, I have to tell you, of my life. Happiest years. But recently, I was asked to make a documentary on Amritsar. So I came back 3 years ago to make a documentary. And I discovered the most fabulous background stories of certain places. I'm sure everybody in Amritsar today knows about Pul Mora, Pul Kanjli. But I learned so much more about the history of that. I learned, for instance, that Pul Mora, that little tiny sleepy place, had been captured by Pakistan twice since independence and then recaptured by India. And that there are several other places along the border that has happened to, which we did not know about. I learned that about that lovely place, which I now can't remember also what it's called. It's about an hour's drive out of Amritsar, and it's a mosque, and it's near that old Sarai. It's that Sarai Amanat Khan.
Okay,
and
I don't
if you
know
haven't
that
been to
no.
Amanat Khan was the man who did the calligraphy on the Taj Mahal.
Okay.
And he built this big sarai, which has been taken over now by the local villagers who built tiled bathrooms inside it. I mean, please go see it before it's totally ruined. It's still got the calligraphy from 1600 and something that is up there.
Wow,
but you know what was the most beautiful thing? Right outside the sarai is a mosque. And when we got there, it was the middle of the afternoon, and all the sardars had gone into the corridors of the mosque to sleep for the afternoon because it was too sunny outside. And I just thought, that it
you
was...
need images like that.
You need images
visuals like that, really.
Absolutely.
Really, in a divisive world, the way we see things now. But thank you. I will definitely make a trip to Sarai Amanat Khan. And the other place which always fascinated me is Preetnagar, which is again about an hour or so away.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Another thing which really seems
and of course,
like...
now with Sahil Ludhianvi's this thing coming up, I think we should make more of it because he lived there.
So many of the big names lived there, and there's very little recognition. I mean, even for somebody like Manto, nobody remembers. Anyway, on that note, thank you so much, Seema. It's been absolutely delightful talking to you.
Thank you, Preeti.
And
Thank you.
We must absolutely get you again. I hope Prabha Khaitan will do that again. Sonakshi, over to you now.
Sonakshi, we can't hear you.
Yeah. Cannot hear.
No.
Actually, I think your volume is down.
I think now it's okay.
Yeah.
That was an amazing session, ma'am. Any questions?
So actually the questions are on the Q&A box.
Okay, I'll just pass you. So we have one question from Praneet. Do you think you would have been able to pursue your line of work if you lived in India? India, the origin of all these stories. What is your take on that, ma'am?
Probably not, or probably not in the same way, for many reasons. One is because I wouldn't be able to have access to my teachers, who are mostly here, to the amount of material and manuscripts that have been preserved, mostly abroad, and also the ability to be able to stand up and say, I can be outside of this inner circle of society, and it doesn't matter because I can be me if I want to. So yeah, I think it would have been, maybe, I'm sure it would have been possible, but just in a far more difficult manner.
Yeah, a lot of complications could have
a lot
been
of
there.
complications.
Yeah. Next question is from Kirandeep Kaur. Most women have been tamed either by their parents or their husbands. What advice would you give to all of us on how to untame ourselves?
This is literally, I think, like I said, Kiran, that all you do is you start to open up those channels in your brain that tell you that who you are. I mean, it's like, it's not just that we have been tamed. We've come into that way of thinking where we've convinced ourselves that this is what we should do, that this is what a good woman does. This is, we are so hemmed in by societal structures and just the societal construct of what we're supposed to be. Just for 1 half hour in a day, I always suggest put that aside and say, what would I like to be or what would I like to do? Give yourself permission first. And then I think you find your path forward, because if we don't know it ourselves, we can't go further. So it is about breaking your own taboos first.
Very true. One question is from Jasmeet Nayaji. I think you have answered it, but she wanted to ask, what makes you so strongly believe that Kama Sutra was written by women?
You know, there's a story in our mythology, I don't know if you've read it or not, where Shiva gets very angry with Kamdev, the god of love and desire.
Yes.
And he opens up his third eye and he burns Kamdev. And what happens in the story is that when Kamdev dies, his wife Rati tries to kill herself. She says, I can't live without my husband. And the other gods say to her, they say, no, we can't have a world without love and desire. Somebody has to do that work. So you carry on his work and we'll bring him back to life eventually. So we are told in mythology that she wrote many of the texts. Now, this is the mythological side of it. But if you were to read some of these texts, they are so women focused. You know, equality for women, pleasure for women, no aggression towards women, women's rights. It just, there is no way in hell that a man would have done that much. When you read it, you'll see what I mean. It's just, you know, if you have something in your hand, if you have the power, which man is going to turn around and say, Acha, theek hai, I have the power, but let's hand it over. You know, it's the person who's trying to change that narrative who's going to work towards it. So I think it was written by women.
Could be very true. So I would like Inaya ji to please come on camera and speak. She has a question.
A very good evening to all. That's my daughter's name. I'm Malvinder Bagri.
Hi, Malvinder.
Hi, it was really nice hearing your session, and we have really been carried away by like what you talked and everything. I just wanted to ask a single question. Your book deals with sexuality, which is a very closed topic in Indian society. Like we all talk about it, but not all of us. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask, did you get any negative feedback about your book from the society? And in case you got it, how did you deal with it? Because I've already I've read half of your book just through conversation. Okay. And I'm sure it's going to be great once I buy and read. So how did you deal with it?
So don't worry about Malvinder about buying it. I know that if you send your address in, Prabha Khaitan is going to post it to you. But it's a strange kind of this thing. I haven't, by the grace of God, you know, again, in India, we always say that it depends on which strata of society you come from. And privilege does bring you, a certain stature does bring you the privilege of choice. So we are privileged enough to make that choice. So I was able to write it without any issues. I was backed by one of the best publishers in India. So, I mean, you know, David Devidar is still one of the best known publishers. He's very highly thought of. So the fact that Aleph were doing it, etc. I must also tell you that it sold really well privately, but a lot of the lit fests had a major issue about it because they were like, and only because the back cover says a way to have great sex in the 21st century, which is not the case in the book, actually. It's a whole different type of thing in the book, but that's what the back cover said. So there was a lot of, I went to a lot of the literature festivals and some of them were like, we're not sure if you, however, I must also tell you that over lockdown, the publishers discovered that it was the most sold of the books. So 3 years later, it's selling in a big way. And so they've just commissioned another one along similar lines. So it's a funny kind of, it's still like Preeti said earlier, there's a subversive narrative. So people want to buy it, people want to read it, etc. But so long as they can wrap the book in something so that other people can't see it. Yeah. And that's really sad because my publishers spent a lot of money buying the rights to the picture that's on that cover.
Oh, great.
It's a very beautiful photograph of somebody and they spent a lot of money buying the rights to that photograph. But yeah, and designing the thing because they wanted it in the sort of, it's in magenta pink and black, and, you know, it was all very sort of dramatic. And yeah, but I think that there will always be people who think, ye kya hai? What can you do, right? But
Thank you
fortunately,
so
no, in answer
Yeah.
to your this thing, fortunately, I haven't, it's
Okay.
been received really well.
But that's really nice to hear that.
Thank
Oops,
you.
we've lost.
Yeah, I
Govinda.
think so. Now I would like Deep, please come and you can ask your question. Yeah, it has been permitted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, Dee.
Yeah, thank you, Seema. First of all, may I say that I have heard almost all of your talks which are available on YouTube and a few of your narrations of stories. So that proves that I'm having a fangirl moment. Now that I'm talking to
Thank
you,
you. I love my
howsoever
fangirls.
virtual it is, but yes, that's true. It's my aha moment.
Okay, wonderful.
Now, how I was given the link to today's Zoom, I would like to tell you that first before I ask the question. This was because I shared a meme with one of the women of SRs, Praneeth, a day before. And the meme that I shared, not only with her, but a few of other friends and groups, that became a topic of debate, a hot debate. And there were so many perspectives and angles to it. The meme was the definition of slut, a woman with the morals of a man. What's your take on that? What's your take on that?
You know, I just don't like the word slut.
I
to begin with.
don't believe, and may I just interrupt? I don't believe in slut shaming. For me, it's not a feminine word; it's a gender neutral word. But what's your take on it?
So I think that again, okay. So yeah, I mean, it is our vocabulary today. Words like morality and so on. I just feel that when, you know, that the difference is going to be that when we actually open up those channels of pleasure in our own head, and we discover that there is so much power and beauty and happiness in that, it's going to lead us to a different place in our own lives. It's not going to be comfortable for other people, not necessarily because you want to go out there and suddenly start having sex with everybody else or whatever. But yeah, it is going to lead us into a different space. I think that when we talk about the morals of a man, again, because they have been led to believe that pleasure only exists for men. I mean, that's what for centuries we've said. Then, and women resultantly have come, but you know, it's a two-way street. So because women have been told that it's only for the men, they believe it. They don't experience the pleasure. They find it boring. They never say anything. A man also believes the same thing. So he's been brought up on the same diet. And so he will go looking for his pleasure elsewhere because he also doesn't know that what actually pleasure is. He only knows what has filtered down to him, which is this instant this and this instant that. So yeah, I guess in response to your meme about, I mean, yeah, if I received that, I would definitely giggle and say, okay, that's funny. And I would definitely sort of say, yeah, you know, it's one of those things, yeah, that, you know, women and men have different standards, et cetera, et cetera. But my response to it would be naturally and quite automatically, because like I said earlier, I'm trying to change the vocabulary to actually move it to saying that if we ourselves don't understand what pleasure is, we're never going to be able to teach it to the next generation, and boys will still grow up with the same idea of pleasure, which will mean to them. You know, the Kama Sutra actually does say at one point that lovers count you. It's very difficult to find a good lover, and your best sex will be with somebody that you have been with for a very long time, because it's not instant attraction. It takes longer to build it up, and hence it's better in the end. But when was the last time a man was taught that? Never. To them, it's chemistry khatam ho gayi hai.
May I thank you?
So maybe that's a really long-winded way of answering your question, Deep. I'm sorry, but
no. I did understand that, and may I thank you for having introduced Guru Charan Das's Kama at one of the Lit Fests, because I chewed that book so well. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Thank you, Deep. We have another question from Dr. Atula Bhaskar, and this is one of the last question. So, women are not comfortable to talk about sex even after getting good education. What is your take on this?
It's a societal construct. We've been so fed to believe that it's a bad thing, that it's not going to change. And that's why, like I said, I keep saying this, that we need to change the pleasure centers, just that open up these things of saying, okay, today I'm going to take a lot of time and trouble to perfume every part of my body. Ladies, I want you all to try this, okay? Not for any other reason, just to give yourself a day of pleasuring yourself, just pampering yourself, saying, okay, I'm going to put some cuss over here. I'm going to put jasmine on my neck. I'm going to put a little bit of musk in my belly button. And just to see what it feels like at the end of it. We don't even, we'll talk about going for a spa day, but when was the last time somebody said, let's lie down, get somebody in with a whole array of perfumes and get her to massage me in my different parts of my body with different perfumes? It's because the channels that lead us to our own pleasure, those little nerve endings have been blocked, and we've blocked them because we've been taught over time that it's a bad thing. So we still believe that sex is a bad thing. I mean, I have a lot of girlfriends who will say, Seema, yaar, fir na shuru kar de. So, like, weird. They might enjoy a couple of my stories, but they're like, acha, acha, bas, hun, bahut ho gaya. And, you're not allowed to talk about it. I think really the responsibility lies with us, that we start looking into it to see how we feel about just like I said, every night for half an hour, any time of the day for half an hour only. Let yourself go into your own mind and explore what gives you pleasure. Don't tell anybody else about it. Don't stop your head. Just see for yourself. You will be amazed at what comes up in your head.
Definitely, we'll try that.
I think it's scary.
It's scary. A lot of people are very frightened about what might come up in their head. You don't have to act on it. Just think about it. That's all.
Thank you. That was lovely.
Thank you so much. So this brings us into our question answer round. And as all good things come to an end in life, so is this session. I hope you all have enjoyed the session. On behalf of Ehsaas Women of Amritsar, I take this opportunity to thank Preeti ji for your enthusiastic support. Seema, Anand ji, we are really enlightened with your knowledge and your presence. And a heartfelt thanks to everyone for such an active participation. A special thanks to Taj Hotel and our media partners, Dainik Jagran, to make it a huge success. At the end, I would request everyone to kindly WhatsApp me or Praneet ji, so if we can arrange the book for you by the author. Thank you so much, everyone.